Welcome to the first episode of the Operation Amigos podcast. Or Operation Amigos, the podcast. What have we decided on?
I don't know that we've decided on
We
a whole lot
haven't
of
really.
anything.
I know. This is totally new to us. And we're sitting in our living room. And we're just going to do this. So this is Operation Amigos. Thank you for being my amigo and being here. I'm Megan Jensen.
I'm Ryan Jensen.
We
Megan
are married.
Jensen's mejor amigo.
Eso.
Yeah,
Mi mejor amigo.
I like that title.
We're married. Just FYI. So, yeah.
And we've been married for 14 years.
Yeah, this year. Ooh, 14 years. Does it feel like 14 years? Or does it feel longer than 14 years?
So, to talk a little bit about our family, you know, we've got 4 kids, and we're on our second dog, and I don't even know how many places we've lived. So, yeah, it feels like 14 years to me. So I hope that you weren't thinking when you said that. It hasn't felt
went
like
by
14
so
years.
fast.
No, it
yeah.
has felt like a solid 14 years to me.
Yep. That's okay. We've learned a lot.
Yeah.
And this is our first foray into the podcast world, which Ryan has actually been talking about for years, wanting to do one. And now we're doing one.
Yeah. I mean, I have a degree in broadcasting, and I always have loved the ability to tell stories, however stories can be told. And I think that stories are are much more compelling than data. They're much more compelling than a lot of different ways that you can convey information. And so to have a personal story behind something that you're trying to teach or an example that you're trying to give, I think will win every day. And so I'm excited that we have found something that you are passionate about. And when you said, man, I think we should do a podcast with this, that was like a dream 14 years in the making. And so here we go. But this is, I mean, really, Operation Amigos is your baby. I take no credit for that. That's something that you have felt really compelled to do. And I'm really excited to let people feel your passion for sharing stories of individuals who are often misunderstood.
Thanks. It is something that has been, I don't want to say bugging me, but bugging me. Like, it's one of those things that keeps me awake at night. Like, no, this is what you need to do. And it all started 14 years ago when we got married. The year we got married, I started having these thoughts of like this book, this story that was coming into my brain. And so I wrote it. I wrote the story, and for the past, I guess it was in our second year of marriage that I started writing that. And for the past 12 years, through raising kids and learning and all of this, I have tried to get that book published and have gone through ups and downs and like wanted to give up, and finally realized that maybe that book was just part of the journey, and that this Operation Amigos was the bigger picture. So for me, Operation Amigos was initially my blog, and it was a place where I wanted to share stories of, first of all, immigrants, because my own dad is an immigrant from Mexico. He came here when he was 20, and he and my mom got married. They met in Mexico. My mom went down to Mexico on an exchange from BYU, and they met and were just friends. But then they started writing, and he came up here, and they got married after a year and then went back to Mexico to live. And anyway, so then ultimately they came back up here to live, and I spent my childhood going to Mexico to visit my family in Mexico, and speaking Spanish, and being in being part of a church group that was all from people from Latin American countries. And it was wonderful. It was a wonderful way to grow up and in a different culture, and it was great.
So you went to school, just normal public schools, English speaking.
Yep.
Part of your childhood, you grew up in a neighborhood where you had Hispanics around you. Was that, I mean, you talked about going down to Mexico and having that influence. Was having Hispanic people around you in your neighborhood, was that influential as well?
It was, but it was frustrating because at school, the first elementary school that I went to in Salt Lake until 5th grade, there were lots of Latinos, and there were quite a few of them that looked Latin, but they didn't speak Spanish. They had never been to Mexico or whatever country they, quote, came from, or their ancestors came from. And so I was frustrated because I was blonde. I had white blonde hair and blue eyes, and I didn't look Mexican, yet I spoke Spanish fluently, and I wasn't the Mexican they were. They were called Mexicans even though many of them weren't from Mexico. They were from other, their parents were from other countries, or their grandparents, or whoever it may be.
And if they weren't called Mexican, they were called Spanish.
Yeah, Spanish, right.
Even better.
Yep. Or they spoke Mexican. Let's get it right. Yeah, so it was kind of frustrating because I would find myself getting a little bit just frustrated that I'm the one that spoke Spanish. I'm the one that went to Mexico every year for Christmas or during the summer to visit my family. And yet they were the ones who were the Mexicans because they looked Mexican and I didn't. So, and to explain that a little bit, my mom, she doesn't have blonde hair. She has dark hair as well. She was born in Utah, but she has dark hair and darker eyes.
But she's not even from Utah, right? Like her family.
Well, she was born in Utah, but they traveled around. My grandma was from California. My grandpa was from Mississippi, and they lived all over the U.S. growing up. So, yeah. So, and then I'll get the question, when people find out I'm Mexican, it's either, oh, okay, so you're adopted. No, I'm not adopted. And number two, my dad's not from the Mormon colonies in Mexico. That's something that you might hear if you live in Utah. You might know that there are Mormons, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who traveled down to Mexico and settled there. And my dad is not. His family was not a part of that group. So he looks Mexican. I mean, he just, so I don't know where I came from. I look different. I've heard all the jokes. But yeah, I'm just an anomaly in my family.
And I have to admit, as your husband, that I have made some of those jokes as well, because I remember when we were engaged and we were getting pictures ready to put together the wedding video. And the first time that I saw the picture of you, it's the studio portrait from, the 1980s. And there's your dad, and he still had not quite as big of an afro as he had in the 70s, but still, he
had big hair.
He had some big hair, even for the 80s. And your mom still with her black hair, and your brother who's just older than you, who looks very much like your father's son, and both of them with very dark skin. And then there was Megan. And at that age, you were like a porcelain doll. You were super milky white skin and bright blue eyes. And I can understand why people would have wondered,
oh yeah,
where did this girl come from?
All my teachers thought I was adopted. My mom will tell you that they were all confused. So that was kind of an identity crisis a little bit as I got older and wanted to claim my Mexican status of being, but felt weird about it because I didn't look that way. And, in school, would I check the Hispanic box or not, when applying for things like awards or scholarships? And would somebody say I was lying if I did? It just became kind of or
the SAT or
any of that stuff.
So I don't think we've talked about this very much, but I wonder, so at that point, I mean, those are kind of the administrative things, right? Filling in a bubble. Mm-hmm. But you talk about how you felt frustrated with those who were called Mexican when you felt more Mexican than them. How did that come out language-wise? Did you try to speak Spanish more to show them, hey, look, I can do that too? Or did you go the other direction and not even want to speak in Spanish to them because you felt like you didn't have a chance to get in?
At school, I didn't. When I was in elementary school, I didn't, unless it was a student that couldn't speak Spanish and I was translating for them, which happened several times. For instance, there was a family that moved in. They moved into an apartment right next to us, and they had, I think it was like 5 kids. They were from Venezuela, and they didn't speak English. And one of their sons was in my class, and so I translated for him. And so, yeah, I spoke Spanish to him, and I would translate everything the teacher was saying to him. And I mean, people in the class would kind of look at me like, I'm just this blonde girl. And so, yeah, so I was always very proud that I could do that. I felt really good and useful. Like, I was able to serve somebody in that way. It was awesome. But when it came to kids in my school that were Latinos that didn't, like I said, a lot of them didn't even really speak Spanish. And so I didn't really use my Spanish very much, other than, like I said, to translate. So, it was kind of just, my early conflict of who am I really inside? Because inside, I felt like I was definitely half Mexican. I loved dancing. My dad had taught me how to dance, and we would have these dances at our church every so often, and we would, Latin dance, we would salsa and merengue, and I felt like I was a pretty good dancer.
And for what it's worth, your dad taught me to dance too.
He did,
I
yes.
just didn't pick it up as well as you did.
He did, because at our wedding, we had to have a Mexican wedding. We had to have a dance. None of this stand in a line. Okay, we did have a line as well, but that was the compromise. It was a hybrid, right? It was a compromise. So we did have a line for a little bit, and then we danced and had a real party. And we had real Mexican food with tamales, and we had, what else do we have? A bunch of other yummy stuff. Birria.
You and I didn't eat any of it.
We didn't eat any of it, I know. But it was great. But that was my condition, is I needed to have a Mexican wedding, and Ryan needed to dance. And so he learned in my parents' kitchen, and he did. He fulfilled his duty, and I'm very proud.
I'm glad that you say that. I very much felt like a fish out of water, because I definitely did not grow up learning how to do any of those dances.
Yeah.
Somewhat ironically, because my dad loved, he loved Singing in the Rain. He loved Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire and all of that. But yet, we never, I can't remember a time I ever saw my dad dance, or my mom. And so, dancing in general was just not ever a part of me. So that was the beginning of, breaking me open to see what I could do. And I'm glad that I could do it, for one good dance at our wedding reception. And I've tried to do it a little here and there.
Yeah, at Christmas when we dance, because Christmas is for dancing.
And we take our kids down to Mexico too.
Yeah, we go to Mexico, and not as often as we would like, but they've been down there. We've been down there with all of them, I think, 4 times? Something like that. And Christmas down there is just the best. It's a party, it's dancing, it's really good food, and our kids love it. So anyway, so back to the whole purpose of Operation Amigos. There was, when we first got married, there was a point of contention that we had. Maybe not contention, disagreement, something that we didn't really agree on. And it had to do with immigration, because growing up, I knew lots of people that had immigrated here. Lots. I was constantly surrounded by people who had immigrated here. I'd hear their stories. I came to really know them. I knew my dad's story. I knew why he had decided to come here. He felt that he didn't really have a choice. If he wanted to get married and have a family, he didn't feel there was any way he could provide for them and stay in Mexico. And so he felt like that was his only option. And he did come here legally. He had the opportunity to get a student visa and then work, but many people don't have that same opportunity. And so I feel like I had a little more understanding of why people might come here illegally, because I knew people personally. And when we got married for Ryan, things were very just cut and dry. Look, if they're here and they broke the law to get here, that's it. They should go home, right? And so there were times that we would talk and I would say, yeah, but it's not that cut and dry. It's not that black and white. There are situations. And quite honestly, it was frustrating because we couldn't see each other's sides, right? Like it was kind of a hard conversation that we constantly had.
That's a really nice way to say we perhaps thought about it a little bit.
Yes, a little bit.
And I think it's important to be honest about that. Like this, it's the kind of topic that can cause friction in not just a marriage relationship, but any kind of relationship. We're recording this in October of 2020, ahead of some contentious elections for President of the United States of America. And that contention a lot of times comes from not listening to or not understanding each other, at least as I go back to that moment in time that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And for me, I grew up, with parents who, my dad listened to a lot of talk radio. And so I, in turn, listened to a lot of talk radio as we're out, we're on the Mustang or the Celica, whatever, he was working on, and we just listened to the radio. And so then through high school, I was listening to Rush Limbaugh and did book reports on Rush Limbaugh. And that was very much the perspective that I came from. And not a lot of that, not a lot of that changed during college. I mean, I like to think that some of it changed during college, but honestly, I think that the fact that we had those discussions, this is after we didn't get married till after I'd graduated from college. You had a semester left, and I learned a lot hearing your stories, because I thought that my way was the way, and I didn't understand why other people didn't grasp why I thought it was that way. And being married put us in a spot where I had to really figure out if what you were saying made any sense. And in the beginning, I think that we had that tension because I didn't want to understand, and I didn't have the stories that you had. And so
they weren't your experience. You didn't know people personally who had come here in that way. Yeah.
And we lived in or just outside of a resort town. We lived just outside of Park City. And the apartment complex that we lived in was completely full of individuals from Latin American countries who, for the most part, would come to Park City to work in the service industry, especially during the wintertime, to work at the ski resorts and restaurants and such.
We called it Little Mexico because it really felt like we were in a different country. It was actually kind of cool to feel like, we're right outside of Park City, but you drive into our apartment complex and you can hear the music, and there's the ice cream truck.
The ice cream truck and the guy selling bread out of the
back of his
car.
Yeah, his car.
Yeah.
It did. It was just this different world that we just felt like was so much of just different cultures. And we started going to a group of our church that was Spanish speaking members. So we were and it's called a branch. And so we started going to church in this little branch where there were a lot of people from lots of different Latin American countries. And the short story is it's not this, this simple, but Ryan started to actually hear people's stories. I mean, there were people who had come there from awful circumstances, who had left behind everything, who had come trying to find just survival, basically a way to feed their families. And it's not that everybody in this branch was in that situation, but there were those individuals that were. And Ryan started to hear these people's stories and make personal connections with them.
And that was just as formative because I saw and learned that they weren't all coming, and I think that going into that, I thought that a lot of them claimed hardship.
Just so that they could
because it would be an easy way to get here. So, the thing that I learned was that, they were all coming from different circumstances. And whether it was, I'm thinking about the countries that they were from. We had Venezuela, Colombia, El Salvador, Mexico, Dominican Republic.
Lots of others.
Yeah. And all of them had their own story. And Operation Amigos is not just about
immigrants.
Immigration.
Yeah.
And recently I was talking with some friends about how when we grow up in families, and I think your family's an example of this as well. When you grow up in families and you have multiple children in the family, every child is having a different experience. A youngest child and an oldest child frequently get after each other because they didn't grow up in the same family. The family evolved as it grew. And your family is almost like two different families growing up. My family is a unique situation because my dad was terminally ill for 14 years. And so my experience is the oldest of 5, and my youngest brother's experience, who was born 13 years after I was, he barely knew my dad. And I knew my dad as a basketball player and softball player and car mechanic, and my little brother didn't get to know any of those things. And so even within our same family, the experience was totally different. So I shouldn't be surprised that being in this congregation of Hispanics, that their experiences of coming to the United States would all be wildly different as well. And I think that was what really opened my eyes to understand individual circumstances that dictate the moves that we make in our life.
Yeah. And so it didn't make it like, okay, well then, however somebody decides to do it, it's fine. That makes it all okay. Like, it wasn't about all of a sudden being like, I don't know how to put this, like breaking the law is okay. Like, that's not what it's about. It's about realizing that this is not a political issue. It's a human issue. It's about humans. And what's so sad is that it becomes just a political issue, withdrawing completely the human side of it. And that, I think, is the problem. And I feel like that's what I want Operation Amigos to be, is injecting the human side back into these issues, things like immigration and the fact that it's people and people's lives and what they've decided to do because of what's going on in their lives, and other, stigmatized groups. There are all sorts of people that you might call, quote, other, that we just don't understand because we're not in their situations. And this is a time in history when this is a good time to start to get to know those stories, with the Black Lives movements and all of that. Let's start listening to some of these things that maybe we brush aside as, no, maybe, we don't understand how big of a problem it is because we're not in it. We're not in the middle of it. Right. But when we start listening, we see that really, these are humans, and what are their stories? You don't know unless you listen. So Operation Amigos is about listening.
Yeah, you mentioned Black Lives Matter. We had the Me Too movement, LGBTQ issues, mental health issues, suicide.
Yeah.
All of these things are so frequently misunderstood. And like I said in the beginning, I love that you have found this passion for sharing those stories, and we've built friendships with individuals who have stories to tell, and we've invited some people who we don't know because we know that they have a great story, and that is the part that's exciting to me. Is I'm glad to tell the stories that we do know and let people have a voice there, but I'm also excited to get to learn from some of the individuals who I don't know as much about. Yeah.
So just as kind of a sneak preview, we've got, we'll be having on a family who, well, we hope. They're actually a family who, the husband is from Mexico and the wife is from here in Utah, and they got married and then had to go back to Mexico for 12 years before they could return here. And hearing that process, that whole process is just eye-opening. It's just things that you might not expect. Because I think for so many of us, we think, well, yeah, why don't they just stand in line and get the papers they need and then they're good to go, right? But that's not the process. I was reading a book once, and you probably remember this because I got outraged. I was reading this book.
Feels like yesterday.
And the book was set in Texas, and this policeman, he found some people who their legality was dubious. He thought they probably were there, undocumented. And so out of the goodness of his heart, he pointed them to the correct office where they could get the papers they needed. And I read this and I screamed. I was so frustrated. I was like, if only it were that simple. If it were that simple, people would do it. There's a reason.
Right. Go to this office and
fill out this
sign
paperwork
here, and then go to the next door down and buy your stamp for 25 cents and send it in.
And then you're legal.
Congratulations.
I wanted to tear that book to shreds. I wanted to call the author and be like, you should not be writing what you don't know. And I feel like that's the problem, is that there are so many things we don't know. So let's get educated. And the best way to do that, I feel like, is to actually hear from the people who are in the middle of these things.
For me, this is a great reason for a podcast like this to exist, because individuals shouldn't tell stories that they don't need to. There are plenty of people around who can tell these stories. Mm-hmm. And so, with, not at, is a great principle. Be an advocate with a group, not at a group or not at somebody else because you feel
We're not
like
preaching.
No, none of that.
Yeah.
You do it with those who feel that they need to be advocated for and who deserve advocacy.
Well, because we're going to be learning a ton. I feel like this isn't us doing this because we know. No, like I need to learn. This is one of the main reasons I want to do this, because I love learning about different situations than the one I am in. I love learning even about sad things. I think it's so beneficial to learn about people, about situations, about things that I don't know, that I'm not in the middle of, because it's easier to be compassionate and be kind and be forgiving when you start to learn, you start to care. And that leads to friendship, which is our tagline. Operation Amigos. How does it go? From learning to caring to friendship. We feel excited about teaching our own kids about how important diversity is and how important every person is. And I loved when we showed our kids the movie Hidden Figures. And it's about the black women who worked for NASA in the 60s? I think it was in the 60s. And they were just blown away that this woman could not use the same bathroom as the other employees. They did not understand. And I was proud of them for not, because I remember one of our twins who at the time was just 7. And she looked at me and said, "But I don't get it, Mom. She's the same as them. Why can't she use the same bathroom? Why do they think she's different?" And I wanted to cry and say, "You're right. There is no reason why she shouldn't have been able to use that bathroom." And even at 7 years old, they recognized that, which I'm glad. That said, we still have a lot to learn, and we still have a lot to teach them about everything,
And that's part of what makes this great, is that we're gonna learn together. We're gonna learn with them, and show them, just like you were saying right here, we don't know everything, and we try to make that a point with our kids too, to let them know that we don't know everything. And for as many jokes as may be made about parents right now who ask Siri in the background or ask Google in the background for an answer to a question, I think it's great for our kids to see the fact that as parents, we don't have all of the answers all of the time. And that the resource is not always Siri or Google. The answer is your neighbors.
Yes,
the answer is
other
the
humans.
people who you can talk with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So. Yeah. Okay. Well, anything else you want to add?
No, I'm excited. So we hope to, come back and we hope that you'll share with us as well your thoughts and feelings. What are things that you want to know? We are on Twitter, Instagram, with Operation Amigos. And so
OperationAmigos.com. There's a podcast page where we'll put podcast notes and pictures and different things that we talk about on the podcast. Also, if you if you are someone or know of someone who would like to participate on this podcast, maybe they have an important story, we'd love to hear from you. There's a contact form on our website and you can shoot us a message. We're open to meeting lots of people, and that's what we hope that we can do through this.
And language is irrelevant. I mean, if it's between the two of us, we cover English, Spanish, and Portuguese of it. But if it's someone who doesn't speak one of those three languages, we're certainly open for
we can
translation
translate
too. Yeah,
totally.
Because that language should not be the barrier that keeps us from hearing each other's stories.
And sometimes it is. Most often it is. And there are so many important stories that need to be told that deserve to be told. It's just it needs to be put out there, even if we have to find translators of other languages. We only speak 3 languages, and there are many other people that speak many other languages, and we'll do what we can to find, if we can find translation or ways to communicate what people want to get across. I feel like that's important.
So that's it. There's a little bit about us, a little bit about Operation Amigos, and thanks for joining us on this journey. And we'll
see you next week.